Take things always by their smooth handle. 10. When angry, count 10 before you speak. If very angry, 100.
4. Friendship.
Takeoff. Home
Good
point
stories
updated.
invite us to slip into the shoes of other people, a crucial step in acquiring a moral perspective. Stories about friendship require taking the perspective of friends, taking others seriously for their own sake. In the best friendships, we see, in perhaps its purest form, a moral paradigm for all human relations. As the selections in this chapter make plain, friendship is more than acquaintance, and it involves more than affection. Friendship usually rises out of mutual interests and common aims, and these pursuits are strengthened by the benevolent impulses that sooner or later grow. The demands of friendship for frankness, for self-revelation, for taking friends' criticisms as seriously as their expressions of admiration or praise, for stand-by-me loyalty, and for assistance to the point of self-sacrifice, are all potent encouragements to moral maturation and even ennoblement. Of course, weaknesses induce companionship just as easily, in fact, more easily than do virtues. There are relationships undeserving of the title of friendship that go by that name nonetheless, the kinds of friendship English essayist Joseph Addison called confederacies in vice or leagues of pleasure. Mutual desires and selfishness can be the foundations of counterfeit friendships. In our age, when casual acquaintance often comes so easily, and when intimacy comes too soon and too cheaply, we need to be reminded that genuine friendships take time. They take effort to make and work to keep. Friendship is a deep thing. It is indeed a form of love. And while it may be, as C.S. Lewis said, the least biological form of love, it is also one of the most important. Every parent knows how crucial the choice of friends is for every child. Childhood friendships tell parents which ways their children are tending. They are important because good friends bring you up, and bad friends bring you down. So it matters who our children's friends are. And it matters, as examples to our children, who our friends are. Friends should be allies of our better natures. We must teach children how to recognize counterfeit friendships, to know they are injurious, to realize they reinforce what is less than noble in us. Having friends is only half the relationship, of course, though it is the half that both children and parents tend to be most consciously concerned with. Being a friend is often more important to our moral development. The other side of good friends bring you up is the side where you are the good friend, the active agent who brings the other up. To befriend a friendless or less fortunate schoolmate can be a profoundly maturing activity for a child. Such familiar exhortations as, "Friends don't let friends drive drunk," and "to have a friend, be a friend," help keep us mindful of this more active side of friendship. Here, then, are some varieties of friendship. Here we find friends who stick together in adversity, friends who give more than they expect to receive, friends who incite each other to higher purposes. We find small deeds done for the sake of friendship, as well as great acts of sacrifice. Friends simply going a little out of their way for each other, and friends risking or even offering their lives. We see pleasure found in new friendships, comfort known in old ones, and pain suffered for those lost. From these varieties of friendships, we learn to improve our own.
Friendship. This poem reminds us of some of the rules of friendship, as well as some of the rewards. Friendship needs no studied phrases, polished face, or winning wiles. Friendship deals no lavish praises. Friendship dons no surface smiles. Friendship follows nature's diction, shuns the blandishments of art, boldly severs truth from fiction, speaks the language of the heart. Friendship favors no condition, scorns a narrow-minded creed, lovingly fulfills its mission, be it word or be it deed. Friendship cheers the faint and weary, makes the timid spirit brave, warns the erring, lights the dreary, smooths the passage to the grave. Friendship, pure, unselfish friendship, all through life's allotted span, nurtures, strengthens, widens, lengthens man's relationship with man.
The Bear and the Travelers by Aesop. Fair-weather friends were around in the days of Aesop in the 6th century BC, and they still abound today. Children should learn how to recognize them and how not to be one. Two travelers were on the road together when a bear suddenly appeared on the scene. Before the bear observed them, one of the travelers made for a tree at the side of the road, climbed up into the branches, and hid there. The other was not so nimble as his companion, and, as he could not escape, he threw himself on the ground and pretended to be dead. The bear came up and sniffed all around him, but he kept perfectly still and held his breath, for they say that a bear will not touch a dead body. The bear took him for a corpse and went away. When the coast was clear, the traveler in the tree came down and asked the other what it was the bear had whispered to him when he put his mouth to his ear. The other replied, "He told me never again to travel with a friend who deserts you at the first sign of danger." Misfortune tests the sincerity of friendship.
Why frog and snake never play together.
This African folktale makes us think about how much companionship the world has missed because people are told they can't be friends with each other.
Once upon a time, the child of the frog was hopping along in the bush when he spied someone new lying across the path before him. This someone was long and slender, and his skin seemed to shine with all the colors of the rainbow. "Hello there," called Frog Child. "What are you doing lying here in the path?" "Just warming myself in the sun," answered the someone new, twisting and turning and uncoiling himself. "My name is Snake Child. What's yours?" "I'm Frog Child. Would you like to play with me?" So Frog Child and Snake Child played together all morning long in the bush. "Watch what I can do," said Frog Child, and he hopped high into the air. "I'll teach you how if you want," he offered. So he taught Snake Child how to hop, and together they hopped up and down the path through the bush. "Now watch what I can do," said Snake Child, and he crawled on his belly straight up the trunk of a tall tree. "I'll teach you if you want." So he taught Frog Child how to slide on his belly and climb into trees. After a while, they both grew hungry and decided to go home for lunch, but they promised each other to meet again the next day. "Thanks for teaching me how to hop," called Snake Child. "Thanks for teaching me how to crawl up trees," called Frog Child. Then they each went home. "Look what I can do, Mother," cried Frog Child, crawling on his belly. "Where did you learn how to do that?" his mother asked. "Snake Child taught me," he answered. "We played together in the bush this morning. He's my new friend." "Don't you know the snake family is a bad family?" his mother asked. "They have poison in their teeth. Don't ever let me catch you playing with one of them again. And don't let me see you crawling on your belly either. It isn't proper." Meanwhile, Snake Child went home and hopped up and down for his mother to see. "Who taught you to do that?" she asked. "Frog Child did," he said. "He's my new friend." "What foolishness," said his mother. "Don't you know we've been on bad terms with the frog family for longer than anyone can remember? The next time you play with Frog Child, catch him and eat him up, and stop that hopping. It isn't our custom." So the next morning, when Frog Child met Snake Child in the bush, he kept his distance. "I'm afraid I can't go crawling with you today," he called, hopping back a hop or two. Snake Child eyed him quietly, remembering what his mother had told him. "If he gets too close, I'll spring at him and eat him," he thought. But then he remembered how much fun they had had together and how nice Frog Child had been to teach him how to hop. So he sighed sadly to himself and slid away into the bush. And from that day onward, Frog Child and Snake Child never played together again. But they often sat alone in the sun, each thinking about their one day of friendship.
Tashira's turn. This story reminds us that friends take responsibility for helping each other. The small, daily examples of friends helping others can turn any one of us into a hero. One day, Tashira ran outside for recess and found her mother on the edge of the schoolyard with a bucket of soap and water. She was scrubbing a wall where someone had painted some ugly words and pictures. She scrubbed as hard as she could. "Mama," Tashira called, "what are you doing?" "Oh, I'm just helping your teachers keep the school clean," her mother said. "It looks like hard work," said Tashira. "It's nothing at all," her mother said, smiling. "It's just my turn to help, you see." The school bell rang. Tashira's teacher looked out the door and waved. Tashira's mom waved back and returned to scrubbing the wall. All the ugly words and pictures ran to the ground, where they turned into puddles of silver and gold. The next morning, Tashira was walking past her church when she heard voices singing in the sky. She looked straight up and saw her teacher on the roof. "Hello,
3,
Mrs. Jenkins,"
2,
Tashira called.
1.
"What are you doing way up there?" "We're helping our friend, Reverend Wilburn," her teacher called down. "The steeple needs a fresh coat of paint." "That's very brave of you to climb so high," Tashira shouted. "It's not so very high," her teacher sang out. "Besides, it's our turn to help today." Reverend Wilburn stepped out the church door and waved to his friends on the roof. Tashira's teacher waved her paintbrush back, and it looked as if she were painting clouds in the sky. The next morning, Tashira was skipping rope when she saw Reverend Wilburn with a basket under his arm. "I'm taking dinner to Officer Hamlet and his family," Reverend Wilburn smiled. "Mrs. Hamlet just had a new baby. Everyone in the church is taking turns sending a meal. Doesn't that smell good?" He lifted the basket's cover so Tashira could peek inside. "It's very kind of you to cook such a nice, juicy turkey," she said. "Oh, it's just my turn to help, that's all," said Reverend Wilburn. He carried his basket up some steps and knocked 4 times. Officer Hamlet opened the door and smiled. Everyone on the street knew Officer Hamlet because he wore such a big,
3,
shiny badge.
2,
Inside
1.
the house, his new baby cried, and his smile grew wider than ever. The next afternoon, Tashira went to the park to play, but the swings were still and the slides were empty because a gang of bad boys stood on the corner, scaring the little children away. Then Officer Hamlet came walking along with his big, shiny badge. When the bad boys saw him coming, they ran away. Officer Hamlet stood on the corner with his arms folded across his chest, watching them go. And before long, all the little children came out to play. "Thank you for being so brave, Officer Hamlet," called Tashira. "We were scared to play until you came out." "Oh, it's nothing," said Officer Hamlet with a smile. "It's just my turn to help, that's all." He stood on the corner all day long, making the playground safe, until the mothers called the children home to their suppers. And even when the sun went down and the shadows faded into the dusk, Officer Hamlet stood under a streetlight, keeping the neighborhood safe. The very next morning, Tashira was riding her bike when she heard a small voice crying. She looked and saw black smoke pouring out an open window. "Someone needs help," she told herself. She jumped off her bike and ran to the window. The smoke stung her eyes and she wanted to turn away, but she glimpsed a little boy inside. "I want my mommy," he sobbed. "I'll take you to her," Tashira told him. She reached through the window and pulled him out, Keisha's still there, he cried, pointing to the house. Toshiro looked back through the window. The smoke was so thick now that she could not see inside. Wait right here, she said. We need more help. Toshiro ran down the street. A moment later, she was back with Officer Hamlet running beside her. Officer Hamlet disappeared into the smoke. Toshiro waited and waited. He was gone an awfully long time. When he finally burst out of the house, he had a little girl in his arms. Now the big fire engines roared down the street with their sirens screaming. The firefighters jumped off the trucks. They dashed into the house with long hoses. The children's mother came running. "Oh, my babies!" she cried. Reverend Wilburn came running. "Toshiro, you're a hero!" he shouted. Toshira's teacher came running. "She's a hero!" she shouted. "Toshira's a hero!" A big crowd gathered around. Toshira's own mother was there to give her a big hug, too. "You're a hero, Toshira!" they all shouted. Toshira just shook her head and smiled. "I'm not a hero," she said. "It was just my turn to help, that's all." But everyone said she was a hero all the same.
3, 2, 1.
The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde.
Like the giant in this tale, we find friendship when we give something of ourselves.
Every afternoon, as they were coming from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars, and there were 12 peach trees that in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. "How happy we are here," they cried to each other. One day the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend, the Cornish ogre, and had stayed with him for 7 years. After the 7 years were over, he had said all that he had to say, for his conversation was limited, and he determined to return to his own
3,
castle.
2,
When he
1.
arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden.
"What are you doing here?"
He cried in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away.
"My own garden is my own garden, and anyone can understand that, and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself."
So he built a high wall around it and put up a notice board. He was a very selfish giant. The poor children had now nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. They used to wander round the high walls when their lessons were over and talk about the beautiful garden inside. "How happy we were there," they said to each other. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, but when it saw the notice board it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. "Spring has forgotten this garden," they cried, "so we will live here all the year round." The snow covered up the grass with her great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs, and he roared all day about the garden and blew the chimney pots down. "This is a delightful spot," he said. "We must ask the hail on a visit." So the hail came. Every day for 3 hours he rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most of the slates, and then he ran round and round the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed in gray and his breath was like ice.
"I cannot understand why the
3,
spring is so late
2,
in coming,"
1.
said the selfish giant as he sat at the window and looked out at his cold, white garden.
"I hope there will be a change in the weather."
But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. "He is too selfish," the spring said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced about through the trees. One morning, the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. It was really only a little linnet singing outside his window, but it was so long since he had heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement.
I believe the spring has come at last,
said the giant, and he jumped out of bed and looked out. What did he see? He saw a most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see there was a little child,
Battery level
and
is
the
low.
trees were so glad to have the
Aircraft will
children
return
back
to the
again
home
that
point
they had
in
covered
10
themselves
seconds.
with blossoms and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene, only in one corner it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach up to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all around it, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could. But the boy was too tiny, and the giant's heart melted as he looked out.
How selfish I have been. Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever
Landing.
and ever.
He was really very sorry for what he had done. So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quietly, and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming, and the giant stole up behind him and took him gently in his hand and put him up into the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds came and sang on it, and the little boy stretched out his 2 arms and flung them around the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant was not wicked any longer, came running back, and with them came the spring.
It is your garden now, little children,
said the giant, and he took a great axe and knocked down the wall. And when the people were going to market at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. All day long they played, and in the evening they came to the giant to bid him goodbye.
But where is your little companion, he said. The boy I put into the tree.
The giant loved him the best because he had kissed him. We don't know, answered the children. He has gone away.
You must tell him to be sure and come tomorrow,
said the giant. But the children said that they did not know where he lived and had never seen him before. And the giant felt very sad. Every afternoon when school was over, the children came and played with the giant. But the little boy whom the giant loved was never seen again. The giant was very kind to all the children, yet he longed for his first little friend and often spoke of him.
How I would like to see him,
he used to say. Years went over, and the giant grew very old and feeble. He could not play about anymore, so he sat in a huge armchair and watched the children at their games and admired his garden.
I have many beautiful flowers, but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all.
One winter morning, he looked out of his window as he was dressing. He did not hate the winter now, for he knew that it was merely the spring asleep, and that the flowers were resting. Suddenly, he rubbed his eyes in wonder, and looked and looked. It was certainly a marvelous sight. In the farthest corner of the garden was a tree quite covered with lovely white blossoms. Its branches were golden, and silver fruit hung down from them. And underneath it stood the little boy he had loved. Downstairs ran the giant in great joy, and out into the garden. He hastened across the grass and came near to the child. And when he came quite close, his face grew red with anger, and he said,
Who hath dared to wound thee?
For on the palms of the child's hands were the prints of 2 nails, and the prints of 2 nails were on the little feet.
"Who hath dared to wound thee?" cried the giant. "Tell me, that I may take my big sword and slay him."
"Nay," answered the child, "but these are the wounds of love."
"Who art thou?"
said the giant, and a strange awe fell on him, and he knelt before the little child. And the child smiled on the giant and said to him, "You let me play once in your garden. Today you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise." And when the children ran in that afternoon, they found the giant lying dead under the tree, all covered with white blossoms.
Ruth and Naomi, adapted from a retelling by Jesse Lyman Hurlbut. The book of Ruth in the Bible is the story of a widow's courageous decision to leave Moab, her homeland, and travel to Judah with her Hebrew mother-in-law, who has lost her own husband and sons. Ruth's words to Naomi are one of the greatest statements of friendship and loyalty in all of literature. "Whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, will I die, and there will I be buried." In Judah, Ruth's fidelity and kindness are rewarded with the love of Boaz, and through marriage to him she becomes the great-grandmother of King David. A long while ago, hard times came to the land of Israel. The crops in the fields dried up and turned brown. The cattle and sheep grew sick and thin. Before long, people were running out of food. In the town of Bethlehem, a woman named Naomi lived with her husband, Elimelech, and 2 sons. Like all the Israelites, Naomi's little family was struggling. Every day their supply of food grew smaller and smaller. They looked at each other with sadness in their eyes, because they knew it wouldn't be long before they had nothing left to eat. So Naomi and Elimelech made a very hard decision. They decided to leave their homeland and move to a country named Moab. They did not want to go any more than you would want to pick up and move far away to a strange place where you did not have a single friend. But they knew it was best for their family to
3,
go.
2,
So they set their faces
1.
to the east and left Bethlehem in search of food. After several days of traveling, they came to the land of Moab. When they saw the fields fat with grain and orchards thick with fruit, they knew they had done the right thing. And soon they were settled in their new home. Naomi's sons both found wives in Moab. One of these young women was named Ruth. She was a beautiful girl with a warm smile and a gentle spirit. Ruth and Naomi would laugh and tell stories while they baked bread or drew water from the well. They became good friends and spent many happy years together. Then tragedy struck. Naomi's husband, Elimelech, and both of their sons died. Suddenly, Naomi felt very old and tired, and very alone in a foreign land. She knew, deep in her heart, that it was time.
3, 2, 1.
To go back to her home. "There is nothing to keep me here," she told Ruth. "I hear that the famine is over in Israel, so I'm going back to Bethlehem. Your place is not with me, an old penniless woman. You must go back to your parents' house. You are young and pretty, and someday you'll marry again." But Ruth did not want to leave Naomi. Naomi was her husband's mother. Ruth loved Naomi dearly and wanted to take care of her for the rest of her days. She threw her arms around Naomi's neck. "Wherever you go, I will follow," she said. "Your home will be my home, your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." When Naomi saw how much Ruth loved her, she did not argue with her any more. The 2 women set out for Israel. They did not know how they would live, for they had no money. They only knew they had each other for support. They reached Bethlehem, just as the barley harvest was beginning. Now, in those days, there was a law to help poor people get food. The law said that after the farmers went through their fields cutting the grain, the poor people could follow and pick up any stalks that had been left behind. This was called gleaning. "I will go out and glean for our food," Ruth told Naomi. It was back-breaking work. All day long, Ruth stooped in the hot sun among the stubble, hunting for fallen grains she could pick up. She never rested or complained, though. Every day she worked to fill up her little sack, knowing that otherwise Naomi would go hungry. Naomi's old friends nodded and said how lucky she was to have Ruth looking after her. One evening, the owner of the field, a man named Boaz, noticed how hard Ruth was working. He asked his reapers who she was. "A foreigner," one told him. "She's the girl who came from Moab to look after old Naomi." Boaz's heart was touched. He went over to Ruth. "You are welcome here," he said kindly. "Do not glean in anyone else's field. Take what you need, and when you get thirsty, drink the water my workers have drawn from the well." Ruth bowed to Boaz and thanked him for his kindness. "Why are you being so good to me?" she asked. "I am a stranger here." Boaz smiled. "I've heard about how you left your home to take care of Naomi," he said. "May God reward you for what you've done. You will always be safe here." When lunchtime came, Boaz brought some bread for Ruth. "Dip your bread in this wine," he told her. She sat with the reapers
3,
and ate until
2,
she was full.
1.
When lunch was over, Boaz spoke to his reapers. "Take good care of this young woman," he told them. "Make sure she gets all the grain she needs. She's had a hard life, and it's up to us to help her now." So Ruth gleaned in the fields of Boaz as long as the harvest lasted. Every day, Boaz watched her cheerfully pick up grain. Every night, he watched her leave the fields and go back to Naomi, carrying grain for their bread. The more Boaz saw the beautiful young woman from Moab, the more he liked her. There was something in her good-natured smile and quiet ways that made him want to take care of her. After a while, Boaz realized that he loved this gentle girl, and that she loved him back. Ruth and Boaz were married, and they found joy together. For many years. Naomi came to live in their home and was as happy as she could be. Before long, Ruth had a baby son named Obed, and Naomi was the proudest grandmother in Bethlehem. When Obed grew up, he had a son named Jesse, and when Jesse grew up, he had a son named David, the very David who killed the giant Goliath with his slingshot and became king of Israel. And so Ruth, the kind Moabite girl who refused to leave Naomi's side, became the mother of kings.
Johnny Appleseed. John Chapman's simple, giving life, 1774 through 1845, made him a legend in his own day. When news of his death reached Washington, Sam Houston stood up in Congress and said, "Farewell, dear old eccentric heart.
3,
Your labor
2,
has been a labor of
1.
love, and generations yet unborn will rise up and call you blessed. This humble pioneer's spirit lives on in the lore of Johnny Appleseed, who chose to be a friend to all in his life's work. There's a wanderer, they say, in the Ohio Valley. He comes by at apple blossom time. Get out of bed early, just as the sun rises, and you might see smoke hanging over the orchard as his breakfast fire dies low. Wait a while longer, and a breeze comes rustling through the trees. The old farmers wink and smile. Here he comes, waking the blossoms to a new spring, they say. That's Johnny Appleseed passing by. John Chapman was his real name. Folks in Pittsburgh say he had a big flowering orchard there,
way back when the country was new. Day after day he sat on his fence and watched covered wagons rolling by, full of pioneer families heading west. Rough lives await them, full of hardship and toil, he thought. What can I do to help? He watched the wagons go rumbling by, and an idea took root in his mind. It grew and grew until it turned into a plan. So he filled a bag with apple seeds and slung it over his shoulder.
3,
Then he wandered away.
2, 1.
Johnny walked through woods filled with oaks and hickories. He crossed fields where tall grasses waved. All grasses waved in the wind. Every once in a while, beside a stream or in a clearing, he would pause and untie his bag. With a pointed stick, he dug holes, then stooped and planted some seeds. He covered them well, knowing they would grow in the sunshine and rain. When the wagons came rolling west, the seedlings were green and strong. He dug them up carefully and gave them to pioneer families. Set them in the earth, and someday you'll harvest nature's jewels, he told them. Apples, apple butter, apple sauce, apple cider, jelly, and pie. The settlers smiled and took the seedlings gladly. They planted orchards beside their new homes. People began to call him Johnny Appleseed. On he went. When his shoes wore out, he walked in his bare feet. Whenever he tore a hole in his shirt, he just took his needle and thread and sewed on a patch. For a hat, he wore the old tin pot he used to cook his dinner. "This is all I need," he would say. "God has made me rich, for I'm helping my fellow man." Far and wide he traveled, across hills and valleys, through summer storms and winter snow. When night fell, he stretched out on a hillside. A mound of moss was his pillow,
3,
the starry sky
2,
his roof.
1.
When morning broke, he would rise and walk on. His orchard spread across the frontier, and so did Johnny Appleseed's fame. Sometimes a Native American came striding along and walked with him through the wilds. But more often than not, he walked alone. Then, they say, the birds perched on his shoulders and deer ate from his hands. Sometimes he would pause and play with bear cubs while the mother bear looked on. When a log cabin came into view, Johnny Appleseed was always welcome to rest his weary feet. Around the big fireplace, the family would gather. The children lay on the floor, and Johnny would pull his Bible from his coffee sack shirt. "Here's news straight from heaven," he'd say. He would read of Noah's Ark or the Sermon on the Mount. His voice was so gentle and his smile so kind, they always asked him to stay a while. He'd shake his head.
3,
"I've got work to
2,
do.
1.
Got to be on my way." Ohio filled up with fences and barns and orchards. "Time to be moving on," Johnny said. He headed west, planting seeds for the country as it moved west too. Some say he came to rest in Indiana beneath the bough of an apple tree. Others say he just kept walking. Who knows how far he got? All across America, in the hills of Tennessee, the plains of Nebraska, the slopes of the Rockies, the wide valleys of California. People point to orchards and say, "Johnny Appleseed planted those trees." Maybe he's been your way too.
The House by the Side of the Road by Sam Walter Foss.
New England poet Sam Walter Foss evokes the age-old image of a humble house where the weary traveler finds a welcome. A house such as Baucis and Philemon's, to remind us that we are here to help one another along life's journey. Friends are helpmates to each other.
There are hermit souls that live withdrawn in the peace of their self-content. There are souls like stars that swell apart in a fellowless firmament. There are pioneer souls that blaze their paths where highways never ran. But let me live by the side of the road and be a friend to man. Let me live in a house by the side of the road where the race of men go by, the men who are good and the men who are bad, as good and as bad as I. I would not sit in the scorner's seat or hurl the cynic's ban. Let me live in a house by the side of the road and be a friend to man. I see from my house by the side of the road, by the side of the highway of life, the men who press with the ardor of hope, the men who are faint with the strife. But I turn not away from their smiles nor their tears, both parts of an infinite plan. Let me live in my house by the side of the road and be a friend to man. Let me live in my house by the side of the road where the race of men go by. They are good, they are bad,
3,
they are weak, they are
2,
strong,
1.
wise, foolish, so am I. Then why should I sit in the scorner's seat or hurl the cynic's ban? Let me live in my
Battery
house
level
by the
is
side
low.
of the road and be a
Aircraft will
friend
return to the home
man.
point in 10 seconds.
Damon and Pythias.
Return to home.
This story takes place in the Sicilian city-state of Syracuse in the 4th century BC. The Roman orator Cicero tells us that Damon and Pythias, also called Phintius, were followers of the philosopher Pythagoras. Even today,
Landing.
their story sets the standard for absolute friendship, which gives every reason for confidence and leaves no room for doubts. Damon and Pythias had been the best of friends since childhood. Each trusted the other like a brother, and each knew in his heart there was nothing he would not do for his friend. Eventually, the time came for them to prove the depth of their devotion. It happened this way. Dionysus, the ruler of Syracuse, grew annoyed when he heard about the kind of speeches Pythias was giving. The young scholar was telling the public that no man should have
Battery level is
unlimited
low.
power over another,
Aircraft
and
will
that
return to the
absolute
home point in
tyrants
10
were
seconds.
unjust kings. In a fit of rage, Dionysus summoned Pythias and his friend. "Who do you think you are?
Landing.
Spreading unrest among the people," he demanded. "I spread only the truth," Pythias answered. "There can be nothing wrong with that." "And does your truth hold that kings have too much power and that their laws are not good for their subjects? If a king has seized power without permission of the people, then that is what I say." "This kind of talk is treason!" Dionysus shouted. "You are conspiring to overthrow me! Retract what you've said, or face the consequences." "I will retract nothing," Pythias answered. "Then you will die. Do you have any last requests?" "Yes. Let me go home just long enough to say goodbye to my wife and children, and to put my household in order." "I see you not only think I'm unjust, you think I'm stupid as well." Dionysus laughed scornfully. "If I let you leave Syracuse, I have no doubt I will never see you again." "I will give you a pledge," Pythias said. "What kind of pledge could you possibly give to make me think you will ever return?" Dionysus demanded. At that instant, Damon, who had stood quietly beside his friend, stepped forward.
Home point updated.
"I will be his pledge," he said. "Keep me here in Syracuse as your prisoner until Pythias returns. Our friendship is well known to you. You can be sure Pythias will return so long as you hold me." Dionysus studied the two friends silently. "Very well," he said at last. "But if you are willing to take the place of your friend, you must be willing to accept his sentence if he breaks his promise. If Pythias does not return to Syracuse, you will die in his place." "He will keep his word," Damon replied. "I have no doubt of that." Pythias was allowed to go free for a time, and Damon was thrown into prison.
3, 2,
After several
1.
days, when Pythias failed to reappear, Dionysus's curiosity got the better of him, and he went to the prison to see if Damon was yet sorry he had made such a bargain. "Your time is almost up," the ruler of Syracuse sneered. "It will be useless to beg for mercy. You are a fool to rely on your friend's promise. Did you really think he would sacrifice his life for you or anyone else?" "He has merely been delayed," Damon answered steadily. "The winds have kept him from sailing, or perhaps he has met with some accident on the road. But if it is humanly possible, he will be here on time. I am as confident of his virtue as I am of my own existence." Dionysus was startled at the prisoner's confidence. "We shall soon see," he said, and left Damon in his cell. The fatal day arrived. Damon was brought from prison and led before the executioner. Dionysus greeted him with a smug smile. "It seems your friend has not turned up," he laughed. "What do you think of him now?" "He is my friend," Damon answered. "I trust him." Even as he spoke, the doors flew open, and Pythias staggered into the room. He was pale and bruised and half speechless from exhaustion. He rushed to the arms of his friend. "You are safe. Praise the gods," he gasped. "It seemed as though the fates were conspiring against us. My ship was wrecked in a storm, and then bandits attacked me on the road, but I refused to give up hope, and at last I've made it back in time. I am ready to receive my sentence of death." Dionysus heard his words with astonishment. His eyes and his heart were opened. It was impossible for him to resist the power of such constancy. "The sentence is revoked," he declared.
3, 2,
"I never believed that such faith and loyalty could exist in friendship. You have shown me how wrong I was, and it is only right that you be rewarded with your freedom. But I ask that in return you do me one great service." "What service do you mean?" the friends asked. "Teach me how to be part of so worthy a friendship."
How Robin Hood Met Little John. Adapted from Henry Gilbert.
Every once in a while, it takes a legendary outlaw to teach lessons about fairness, generosity, chivalry, and comradeship. Robin Hood and his band of merry men ranged the forests of Sherwood, Nottinghamshire, and Barnesdale in Yorkshire during the days when King Richard the Lion-Hearted was far away fighting in the Crusades, and the cunning, greedy Prince John ruled in his absence. In this story, good sportsmanship, grace in victory, humor in defeat, makes good friendship.
Once, Robin Hood was journeying through the forest of Barnesdale when he came to a broad stream crossed by a narrow beam of oak. It was wide enough for only one man to cross at a time, and of course had no railing. Robin walked some 2 or 3 feet along it, when on the other bank a tall man appeared, and jumping onto the bridge, also began to cross it. They stopped and frowned at each other when they were but some 10 feet apart. "Where are your manners, good fellow?" Robin called. "Couldn't you see I was already on the bridge
3,
before you placed your
2,
great big feet on
1.
it? Get back." "Go back yourself, acorn head," retorted the other. "A small jack should always give way to the big pot." "You're a stranger in these parts, you chucklehead," said Robin. "Your currish tongue betrays you, but I'll give you a good Barnesdale lesson if you don't retreat and let me pass." Saying which, he took up his bow and drew an arrow. The tall man, with a half-angry, half-humorous twinkle in his eye, glanced at it. "Oh, if this is your Barnesdale teaching," he rejoined, "it is the teaching of cowards. Here you are, with a bow in your hands, ready to shoot a man who has only his walking staff for a weapon." Robin paused. He was downright angry with the stranger, but there was something honest and good-natured about the giant which he liked. "Have it your way, then," he said. "Wait here." He turned and went back to the bank, where he cut a stout staff of his own, and trimmed it to the weight and length he desired. Then he jumped back onto the bridge. "Now," said Robin, "we will play a little game together. Whoever is knocked from the bridge to the stream shall lose the battle. Ready? Go." With the first twirl of Robin's staff, the huge stranger could see he had no novice to deal with, and he soon found that Robin's arm had strength equal to his own. For a long time their staffs whirled like the arms of two windmills, and when they clashed, the crack of wood was tossed to and fro between the trees on either side of the stream. The stranger lunged, and his stick came down with a sharp rap on Robin's skull. "First hit goes to you," cried Robin. "Second hit to you," said the giant, with a good-natured laugh, rubbing a new bruise on his left forearm. Quick as lightning the blows descended now, and the very bones of both men rattled. Keeping their footing on the narrow bridge was almost impossible. Every step made, forward or backward, had to be taken with great care, and the power of every blow they gave or received almost threw them over the side. Suddenly, Robin landed a blow on the big man's crown, but the next instant, with a furious stroke, the stranger struck Robin off his balance. With a mighty splash, the outlaw landed in the water. For a moment, the giant man seemed surprised to find no enemy before him. Wiping the sweat from his eyes, he cried, "Hello, good laddie, where have you gone?" He bent down anxiously and peered into the water flowing rapidly beneath the bridge. "By St. Peter," he said, "I hope the bold man is not hurt." "Faith," came a voice from the bank a little farther down. "Here I am, big fellow, as right as rain. You have the day, and I shall not need to cross the bridge." Robin pulled himself up the bank, and kneeling down, washed his face in the water. When he rose, he found the big stranger at his side, dashing water over his own head. "What?" cried Robin.
3, 2,
"Have you not gone forward
1.
on your journey? You were in such a hurry to cross that bridge, and now you've come back." "Scorn me not, good fellow," said the big man. "I have nowhere to go that I know of. I am but a serf who has run away from his manor, and tonight, instead of my warm hut, I shall have only a bush to sleep under. But I would like to shake hands with you before I go, for you are as true and good a fighter as I have ever met." Robin's hand was on the other's at once, and they gave a shake of mutual respect and liking. "Stay a while," said Robin. "Perhaps you would like supper before you go wandering." With these words, Robin placed his horn to his lips and blew a blast that woke the echoes, made the blackbirds fly shrieking away, and every animal in the forest dive for the nearest cover. Then came sounds, as if deer were scurrying through the bushes, and in a moment the forms of men emerged from the dark wall of trees. "Why, good Robin," one called, "what happened to you? You're soaked to the skin." "'Tis no matter at all," laughed Robin. "You see that tall lad there? We fought on the bridge with our staffs, and he tumbled me in." "Seize him, lads!" Robin's men cried, springing toward the stranger. "Toss him in and duck him well." "Nay, nay," shouted Robin, laughing. "Hold back, lads. I have no ill will, for he's a good fellow and bold. Listen here, my man," he said to the stranger. "We are outlaws, brave lads who hide here in the forest from evil lords, and we make it our business to take from the rich what they've stolen from the poor. Join us, if you will. I can promise hard knocks and good cheer." "By earth and water, I'll be your man," cried the stranger, seizing Robin's hand. "Never heard I sweeter words than those you've said, and with all my heart I will serve you and your fellowship." "What is your name, good man?" asked Robin. "John of the Stubbs," replied the other, and then with a great laugh, "But men call me John the Little." The others laughed too, and pressed forward to shake hands with him. Then they raced back to camp, where a great iron pot waited for them over a fire, from which rose most appetizing odors for men grown hungry in greenwood air. Standing around John the Little, who overtopped them all, the outlaws held their mugs to a great wooded cask to be filled to the brim with brown ale. "Now, lads," cried Robin, "we will baptize our new comrade into our good free company of forest lads. He has until now been called John the Little, And a sweet, pretty babe he is. But from now on, he shall be called Little John. 3 cheers, lads, for Little John! How they made the twilight ring! The leaves overhead quivered with their shouts. Then they tossed off their mugs of ale, and gathering around the cauldron, they dipped their bowls into the rich stew and fell to feasting.
Helen Keller's teacher. There is no friendship more sacred than that between student and teacher, and one of the greatest of these was the friendship of Helen Keller, 1880 to 1968, and Anne Mansfield Sullivan, 1866 to 1936.
3, 2,
Illness
1.
destroyed Helen Keller's sight and hearing when she was not yet 2 years old, leaving her cut off from the world. For nearly 5 years she grew up, as she later described it, wild and unruly, giggling and chuckling to express pleasure, kicking, scratching, uttering the choked screams of the deaf-mute to indicate the opposite. Anne Sullivan's arrival at the Kellers' Alabama home from the Perkins Institution for the Blind in Boston changed Helen's life. Sullivan herself had been rendered half-blind from an eye infection from which she never fully recovered, and she came to Helen with experience, unbending dedication, and love. Through the sense of touch, she was able to make contact with the young girl's mind, and within 3 years, she had taught Helen to read and write in Braille. By 16, Helen could speak well enough to go to preparatory school and college. She graduated cum laude from Radcliffe in
8. Honesty. To be honest is to be real, genuine, authentic, and bona fide. To be dishonest is to be partly feigned, forged, fake, or fictitious. Honesty expresses both self-respect and respect for others. Dishonesty shows respect for neither oneself nor others. Honesty imbues lives with openness, reliability, and candor. It expresses a disposition to live in the light. Dishonesty seeks shade, cover, or concealment. It is a disposition to live partly in the dark. Why would anyone
Landing.
want to be dishonest? That is a question with which the Irish satirist Jonathan Swift